3 weeks before my brother's wedding, my father sat me down at the kitchen table, the same one where he used to help me with long division in 4th grade, and told me something that made me set down my coffee cup very carefully, because I was afraid I might drop it. "We've put everything into a living trust," he said. "The house, the investment accounts, the business, all of it goes to you when we're ready to transfer. We're ready now." I didn't say anything for a long moment. "How much?" I finally asked. "Just over 4 million. I drove home on autopilot. I don't actually remember most of that 40-minute commute. What I remember is sitting in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex, watching a guy in a North Face jacket walk his golden retriever, thinking, nothing looks different. How does nothing look different? I should back up. I'm a speech-language pathologist at a mid-sized hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I drive a 2019 Camry with a cracked dashboard that I keep meaning to get fixed. I bring my lunch to work 4 days out of 5 because hospital cafeteria prices are genuinely offensive. I am, by any reasonable measure, a fairly ordinary 31-year-old woman. And until my father called and asked me to come over on a Tuesday evening, I had exactly $14,000 in savings and a vague, anxious plan to maybe start a Roth IRA before I turned 35. My parents, it turned out, had been quietly, almost aggressively normal their entire lives, and also somehow quietly wealthy. My father built a small commercial landscaping company over 30 years. My mother managed their finances with a discipline that bordered on obsessive. They lived in the same 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville that they bought in 1989. They drove sensible cars. They took 1 vacation a year, always to somewhere within driving distance. What they did not do was talk about money. Not once, growing up, did I have any real sense of what they had or didn't have. "We're comfortable," my mother used to say, in a tone that closed the subject. I was the younger child. My brother, Donovan, was 4 years older, and he had, for most of our adult lives, operated under the assumption that being older meant being more important. He'd been saying things like that out loud since we were teenagers. Little comments, smoothly delivered, about how firstborns traditionally inherit more, how he'd probably be the one to handle things when the time came, how he'd already started thinking about what he'd do with the family property. I used to let those comments slide off me. My brother wasn't cruel exactly. He was just certain of things he had no reason to be certain of. He'd done well for himself, objectively. He had a good job in finance, a big house in Dublin, the expensive suburb, not the country, and a fiancée named Petra who wore her highlight like a personality trait and referred to their upcoming wedding as the event. They'd been engaged for 2 years. The wedding was going to cost, I would later find out, somewhere in the neighborhood of $65,000, which my parents had agreed to help with. I thought about that number a lot after my father's conversation. $65,000 for 1 day, and my parents had written that check without blinking because that's what Donovan wanted, and Donovan had a way of wanting so confidently that it became easier to give them to him than to explain why you weren't going to. After my father told me about the trust, he told me something else. "We haven't told your brother," he said. "We're not going to, for a while. We want you to keep this between us." I asked why. My father looked at his hands. He had the hands of someone who'd spent decades working outdoors. Rough, wide, permanently tanned to the wrist. "Because," he said, "we want to see who Donovan is when he thinks there's nothing to gain." I didn't fully understand that at the time. I thought I did, but I didn't. The weeks between that conversation and the wedding was strange in a way that's hard to describe. I knew something enormous, and I had to carry it around like it weighed nothing. I went to work. I did my sessions with my patients, mostly kids with articulation disorders and a few stroke survivors learning to swallow again. I went to the rehearsal dinner and watched Petra give a toast that was primarily about Petra. I smiled. I ate the salmon. Donovan, to his credit, was in a genuinely good mood during those weeks. He was getting married. He was happy. And I found myself noticing, maybe for the first time, how much of his happiness was contingent on things going his way. When the florist confirmed the arrangements he'd wanted, he was warm and funny and the best version of himself. When the venue coordinator called with a small problem about parking, he was on the phone for 40 minutes, his voice dropping into a register I recognized from childhood, very controlled, very quiet, which was somehow worse than yelling. The week before the wedding, he stopped by my apartment to drop off some boxes my parents had asked him to bring over, old stuff of mine they'd found in the attic. He sat on my couch and looked around my place with an expression he probably didn't know he was making. "You should really think about buying," he said. "Renting is just throwing money away." "I know," I said. "I could connect you with my mortgage guy, get you into something small, a starter condo or whatever." He said, "Starter condo or whatever, the way you'd say, a studio apartment in whatever neighborhood. Casual, slightly condescending, not mean, just Donovan." "I'm fine," I said. He shrugged. "Just trying to help." After he left, I sat with the weird feeling of knowing something he didn't. It wasn't satisfying exactly. It was more like watching someone walk confidently in the wrong direction and not being able to say anything. The wedding was beautiful, genuinely. The venue was an old converted barn in the countryside outside Columbus, and whoever they paid to string lights through the rafters had earned every dollar. My mother cried during the vows. My father danced with me to a song I didn't know but that he apparently loved in 1987. Petra looked stunning. Donovan looked like the happiest version of himself. I drank 2 glasses of champagne and thought, this is real, whatever comes next. This moment is real. But something happened at the reception that I've thought about many times since. I was standing near the bar with my cousin and one of Donovan's college friends when I overheard Donovan talking to Petra's father, a quiet, well-off man named Douglas who owned a chain of optical clinics. They were standing maybe 10 feet away, and I wasn't trying to listen, but the room had quieted for a moment and Donovan's voice carried. "I knew a house without the timing works out," Donovan was saying. "My parents aren't young anymore. When everything transfers, we'll have real capital to work with. I've already been talking to a financial advisor." Douglas said something I couldn't hear. "Oh, the house alone is worth close to 800, Donovan said. "And that's not even counting the business. I figure a few more years, maybe 5, and we're talking a completely different financial picture for us." He was talking about my parents' assets like they were a line item in his personal 5-year plan. Like the timeline was already set. Like it was simply a matter of waiting. I put down my champagne glass and went to find my mother. She was at the dessert table, loading a small plate with things she absolutely was not supposed to eat because of her blood pressure. She looked up when she saw my face. "You heard something," she said. "How long has he been talking like that?" She set down the plate. "A while," she said quietly. "He doesn't think we can hear him, or maybe he doesn't care." She didn't seem angry. She seemed tired in a way that was different from tired. "Your father and I talked about this for a long time," she said. "What the right thing to do was. We kept going back and forth." She picked up the plate again. "The trust is the right thing. You've always shown up, not because of what you'd get, just you show up." I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not someone who handles compliments from my parents gracefully. I think I said something like, "Okay," and then stood there for a moment too long. "Eat something," my mother said. "The macarons are very good." I ate a macaron. It was, in fact, very good. 3 months after the wedding, my parents called us both to the house for what they described as a family conversation. Donovan and Petra arrived first. Donovan was in a good mood. He'd just closed some deal at work and was in that particular elevated state he got into sometimes, louder than usual, taking up slightly more space, full of the easy generosity that came when he felt like things were going his way. My parents sat us down in the living room. My father had a folder on the coffee table. He folded his hands on his knees and looked at both of us and said calmly that they had completed a trust transfer and that they wanted to explain how it was structured. Donovan leaned forward. I watched him. My father explained that the trust had been divided. The business and the primary investment accounts, totaling just over $4 million, had been transferred to me 18 months ago. The house, which they intended to remain in for as long as they were healthy, was an irrevocable trust with specific succession terms. Donovan would receive those terms in writing, and the distribution was not equal, but it was considered, and they were happy to discuss it. The room was very quiet. I had been watching Donovan's face. I watched the moment he heard the number. I watched the way his expression shifted, not immediately into anger, but into something more unsettling, a kind of recalculation, like a machine running a process it hadn't expected to run. 4 million, he said. Yes, my father said. To her? To your sister, yes. Petra had gone very still beside him. Donovan turned to look at me. I didn't look away. How long have you known? He asked. About 18 months, I said. He was quiet for a moment. And you didn't tell me. Dad asked me not to. Something moved across his face. I thought he was going to stand up. Instead, he exhaled slowly, looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked back at my father. I don't understand, he said. I'm the oldest. I've always been the one who planned for this. I've had conversations with financial advisors, I thought. I knew what you thought, my father said. Not unkindly, just evenly. I've known for a while what you thought. There was a long pause. My father said, we've watched both of you for a long time, the way you handle money, the way you handle people, the way you talk about the future. He looked at Donovan steadily. 2 years ago, you told Douglas that our house was worth close to 800,000 and that you'd be working with the capital once things transferred. I was in the kitchen. I heard you. Donovan's jaw tightened. We're not punishing you, my mother said. Her voice was gentle and firm at once, the way it used to be when we were kids, and she meant what she was saying. This isn't punishment. But we had to be honest with ourselves about what we were seeing. Your sister has never, not once, made a decision about us that we thought came from what she'd gain. That's not fair, Donovan said. His voice was still controlled, but there was an edge in it now. That's not a fair way to measure it. Maybe not, my mother said, but it's how we measured it. Petra spoke for the first time. She said very quietly, Donovan, let's go. He didn't move for a moment. Then he picked up his jacket from the arm of the couch and stood up. He looked at me once more, and I couldn't read the expression. It wasn't hatred, it was something more complicated. Something that looked almost like grief, which surprised me. I hadn't expected grief. They left without the folder. The weeks that followed were difficult in ways I hadn't fully prepared for. I'd known this conversation was coming for 18 months, and I'd still somehow convinced myself it would go better than it did. Donovan didn't call me for 6 weeks. When he did, it was a short conversation, stiff, careful, like talking to someone through a glass wall. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse me of anything. He just said he needed time, and I said I understood, and we hung up. My parents seemed to be doing okay. My father took up pickleball with an enthusiasm that I found genuinely alarming. My mother read approximately 1 murder mystery per week and reported on each of them with great authority. I went back to work. I continued to drive my Camry with the cracked dashboard. I still don't know exactly what to do with the knowledge of what's in that trust account. It doesn't feel real in any daily sense. I haven't changed anything about how I live. I looked up whether I could put money into a neighborhood literacy program I've been following, and I made a donation that felt meaningful without feeling reckless, and that seemed like a start. About 4 months after the family meeting, Donovan called again. Not a short call this time. He talked for a long time. He said things I don't think he'd ever said out loud before, about pressure he'd felt, about expectations, about the story he'd been telling himself for years about what the future was supposed to look like and where he fit in it. He said he'd been talking to a therapist, which he delivered in a tone like he was expecting me to be surprised. I wasn't surprised, I was glad. I said, I'm not angry at you, I was never angry at you. He was quiet for a moment. Were you ever going to tell me before, Dad? I wanted to, I said, but I think he needed to be the one to say it, not me. I heard him exhale. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I think you're right. We didn't fix everything in that phone call. These things don't work like that. But something shifted, or maybe something that had always been slightly out of place finally settled into where it was supposed to be. I've known my brother for 31 years. I know that the person he is when things are going his way is genuinely good. I also know that he has work to do, and I think, for the first time, he knows it too. My mother told me, the last time I visited, that she wasn't sure they'd made the perfect decision. She said she'd thought about it many ways. She said that fairness was harder to define than she'd expected, and that she hoped both of us knew the money was almost beside the point. I asked her what the point was then. She looked at me the way she sometimes does, like the answer is so obvious she's deciding whether it's worth saying out loud. That we knew you, she said, that after everything we really knew who you were. I drove home the same way I always do. Same highway, same exit, same cracked dashboard. I stopped for gas and stood outside in the November cold for a minute longer than I needed to, looking at nothing in particular. The money is real, the responsibility is real, but so is this. My father building that company with his hands for 30 years, and my mother tracking every dollar in a spiral notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer, and the two of them sitting at that table together, deciding not what was equal, but what was true. That part, I think, is the actual inheritance. The rest is just paperwork. I keep coming back to that moment at the wedding reception, standing 10 feet away from my brother, holding a champagne glass I'd forgotten about, listening to him tell his new father-in-law about a financial timeline built entirely around our parents not being here anymore. He wasn't being monstrous. That's the part I've had to sit with. He was just saying out loud what he'd been quietly believing for years, and he believed it so completely that it never occurred to him to lower his voice. What I've learned, slowly, imperfectly, is that the way we behave when we think no one is watching, or when we think there's nothing yet to gain, is probably the most honest version of who we are. My parents understood that before I did. They spent 30 years building something with their hands and their discipline, and their refusal to spend money on things that didn't matter. And somewhere along the way they got very clear-eyed about what they were actually watching in their two children. They weren't judging Donovan, they were just paying attention. There's a difference. The thing about integrity, about doing the right thing even when it costs you something, even when no one's keeping score, is that it tends to compound over time, the same way debt does, just in the opposite direction. I didn't drive to my parents' house every Sunday because I expected anything. I showed up because they're my parents, and that's what you do when you love people, and they're getting older. That's it. But those Sundays added up into something my parents could see clearly, even when I couldn't. I think about my brother now with a lot more compassion than I used to. The story he'd told himself, that he was the one who'd handle things, the one who'd earned the largest share by virtue of being first. That story wasn't built from nowhere. It came from something real inside him, some need to matter, to be seen as capable and important. I recognized that need. I just expressed it differently. He expressed it by planning. I expressed it by showing up. Neither of us was trying to be a character in a lesson. We were just living, and the difference in how we lived turned out to matter more than either of us knew. What I want to hold on to from all of this, the part I don't want to lose, is the reminder that clear thinking protects you, not cynicism, not suspicion, just the willingness to look at a situation honestly and ask, what is actually happening here, and what does it require of me? My father saw what Donovan was doing long before the wedding. He didn't react with anger. He responded with a plan, a careful, fair, considered plan that took years to put into place. That kind of patience, that kind of deliberate thinking, is something I'm still learning. And the endurance piece, the part about continuing to show up when there's no obvious reward, that's the one I think gets underestimated the most. Anyone can do the right thing when it's easy or when someone's watching. The interesting question is what you do on a random Tuesday when there's nothing in it for you. My parents watched both of us answer that question over and over for years. The money is sitting in an account. I look at the balance sometimes and feel something I don't have a clean word for. Not guilt, not pride, something more like responsibility with weight to it. I don't want to waste it. I don't want to waste what it represents. 30 years of someone's early mornings and late invoices and steady, unglamorous choices. I owe it something better than complacency. Donovan called again last week. We talked for almost an hour. It was easier than it's been in a long time. I think we're both figuring out, in our own ways, who we actually want to be now. That part, at least, we're doing at the same time.